Finding a human bone in a rusty snare among the rock falls of El Capitan is almost impossible, especially when you realize that this find could shatter everything you believed in when you switched from corporate life to ranger work. My name is James Wilson, and in March 1985, I discovered a secret that forced me to choose between principles and money that could change my life. I am 34 years old, and before working in Yosemite, I was a geologist for a San Francisco exploration company, a degree in geology, 3 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, then 6 years in offices where the main goal was to squeeze the most profit out of every deposit. Divorce from my lawyer wife in 1983 finally convinced me that corporate life was choking everything alive. Alimony, student loans, and check-to-check wages, that was the price of trying to start again. I joined the National Park Service a year ago, in March 1984. I was looking to protect nature instead of exploiting it. I was assigned to Yosemite, a site near El Capitan, one of the most famous cliffs in the world. My site covers the foot of El Capitan on the east side, including an area of old rock falls. Stones the size of buses have been lying there for decades, forming mazes of passages and dead ends. In summer, the place is sometimes visited by experienced hikers, but in winter and early spring, it is deserted. A perfect place to hide something or find something that was hidden long ago. The ranger's equipment then was simple. A radio with a 5-mile range, a compass, topographical maps, binoculars, a torch, and an army rucksack. No GPS or satellite phones. In a critical situation, you have to rely only on yourself and your experience. On the 4th of March, 1985, early spring began. The temperature rose to +8 in the daytime and dropped to -3 at night. The snow in the valley melted quickly, revealing what had been hidden all winter. In the mornings, thick fog would drift between the rocks, and visibility would drop to 10 meters. It was in such weather that discoveries were made that would have been better not to make. My route that day took me through the far side of the rock falls, where I hadn't been since autumn. My plan was to check the condition of the warning signs and make sure that winter rockfalls had not blocked the emergency trails. Just a normal job, a routine check. No one warned me that by evening I would know more than I wanted to know about what had happened in these parts 20 years ago. At 7:30 a.m., I left the ranger base. The thermometer read -1. In my rucksack, I had a thermos of coffee, 2 sandwiches, a first aid kit, spare batteries for my torch, and a notebook. It was an hour-and-a-half walk to the rockfall zone along a familiar path. As I approached the first large boulders, I noticed an oddity. The snow was uneven. Somewhere it had melted completely, somewhere it was still thick. In one place between 2 granite blocks, something metallic was visible. As I got closer, I realized that I had found something that someone had lost a long time ago and had hardly hoped to find. The metallic glint among the rocks was the rusty teeth of a trap, an old heavy one, the kind used by hunters decades ago. But what was clamped between its jaws made me take a step back. Human bone, tibia, judging by the size and shape, darkened by time but preserved enough to leave no doubt that it was human remains. The trap was in a crevice between 2 boulders where water flowed in the rains and snowmelt, washing away the earth and exposing what had been hidden for years. I took out a notebook and wrote down the coordinates and time of discovery. I photographed the find from different angles using the camera I carried in my backpack for documenting violations. My military habits never go away. First to record, then to analyze. The trap was set professionally. It was camouflaged with leaves and small stones, although the camouflage had almost disappeared over the years. The chain went under a large boulder, where it was probably attached to a metal pin. Whoever set it knew what they were doing. Hunter's Trap #4, made by the Victor Company. These were made until the mid-1960s, then banned for use in national parks. But what was the hunter doing in this area, and who fell into his trap? 15 meters from the snare, I noticed an unnatural flatness between the stones. After clearing away the snow and fallen leaves, I found the remains of a campfire. It was old, but preserved by the dry climate under a canopy of granite blocks. The embers crumbled to dust when touched, but the stones were arranged in a ring too neatly for it to be an accidental campfire. Next to the fire, something glistened between the rocks. A tin can, rusted to holes but with the label still attached. A bean, the label design of the early 1960s. I remembered such cans well from my childhood. I climbed higher up the slope, checking every crevice and hiding place between the boulders. Army experience told him that if there had been a camp here, there must be other tracks. And there were. Behind the third boulder, in a natural niche protected from the rain by an overhanging rock, lay the remains of a tarpaulin. Pieces of an Army tarp, burned and cracked, but preserved enough to make out the unit number, U.S. Army 1965. Scraps of rope and metal tent eyelets lay nearby, but the most interesting find was a rusty hammer. Not an ordinary carpenter's hammer, but a geological hammer, a special tool used to split rock samples. I used to work with them at the university in the company. The handle was almost completely rotted away, but the metal head was still intact. I sat down on a boulder and pulled out a thermos of coffee. I had to think about the finds. A geological hammer, Army equipment from 1965, a professionally set trap, human remains. A picture was beginning to emerge, but not the one I wanted to see. Someone camped here in the mid-1960s. Judging by the equipment, it was military or ex-military with a geological background. Why would he want a trap in a national park? And what happened to whoever got caught in the trap? I continued to explore the area, gradually expanding the search radius. In geology, it is important to see the big picture without focusing on individual samples. The same principle applied here. Half an hour later, I found what I was looking for without even knowing it. In the crevice between two massive blocks, where water flowed in the summer, white veins in the dark granite were visible. Quartz veins intersecting the underlying rock at an acute angle. The quartz itself was of no value, but what I saw in these veins made me realize the real reason for the geologist's presence in these places. Inclusions. Small green and red crystals embedded in white quartz, tourmaline and garnet. Not of jewelry quality, but pure enough to be of commercial interest to someone who knew where to find them and how to extract them. The mining marks were almost imperceptible, but obvious enough for a geologist. Chips in the surface of the vein left by a chisel, small depressions where someone had carefully extracted the most valuable samples, the work of a professional who didn't want to leave any visible traces of mining. I checked the radio. At this depth, the connection was lost in rockfalls, but occasionally the signal broke through. I told the dispatcher my location and time of possible return, standard procedure, but especially important in such cases. It was still an hour's walk to the base, and the daylight hours were short in March. But there was one more thing to do before leaving. Carefully photograph and document all the finds, especially quartz veins with traces of mining. I will write about the routine inspection of the area in the report, but I will keep the photos and coordinates for myself. Something about this story needed more in-depth investigation. A geologist with Army equipment, secret mining of gems in a national park, human remains in a trap. Too many questions for one day. And the main one, if the geologist worked here, where is he? Did the bone in the trap belong to his victim or to him? I gathered my gear and began my descent to the main trail. The fog was beginning to clear, revealing a view of Yosemite Valley below. It looked peaceful and beautiful from here. Campers in the campsites were preparing lunch. Climbers were checking their gear before climbing El Capitan, a typical day in the national park. None of them knew that a few hundred meters from the popular trails lay evidence that 20 years ago, these places were not so peaceful at all, and that the mystery I had begun to uncover might be more dangerous than it seemed. Back at the base by 5 p.m., I wrote the usual site inspection report. The condition of the trails was satisfactory, the warning signs were in order, and no violations were found. Technically, this was true. I really hadn't encountered any living trespassers. But in the evening, studying topographical maps and archival documents in my trailer, I realized that I would have to return to the rockfalls tomorrow. Too many questions remained unanswered, and too many clues indicated that the tale of the outlaw geologist was not over, but was just beginning. In the morning, I went down to the National Park Service archives. Old report folders, incident logs, correspondence, everything accumulated over decades of work, looking for information on missing persons in the El Capitan area in 1965, 1967. Archivist Susan Martinez brought 3 boxes of dusty documents. The work is monotonous, but in the Army we were taught that important information is often hidden in the dullest of reports. The first 2 hours provided little useful information. The usual incidents: lost hikers, minor injuries of climbers, violations of campfire rules. But an interesting note was found in the folder for August 1966. Ranger David Clark's report of the 23rd of August 1966. Traces of an unauthorized camp were found in the rockfall area at El Capitan. Remains of a campfire, tin cans, scraps of equipment. Trespassers had left the site before my arrival. In the September file, I found a follow-up. The same Clark's report of the 15th of September. Rediscovery of traces of activity in the restricted zone. Found metal tools of unknown purpose, pieces of quartz with traces of processing, fragments of geological maps. I recommend to intensify patrolling of the area. David Clark was on file until 1967, then disappeared from the records. I asked Susan to find his personnel file. She came back half an hour later, puzzled. That's odd. The file's incomplete. There's no discharge papers. The last entry is October 1966. Clark, 31, ex-military from the Corps of Engineers. Geological engineering degree, UC Berkeley. Enlisted March 1965. Excellent credentials, no infractions, and a complete lack of information after October 1966. He was succeeded in November by another ranger, Mike Thompson. His reports were concise and contained no mention of illegal activity. Either the offenders had disappeared or the new ranger was instructed to overlook certain things. A major find was waiting in the December file. Mariposa County Sheriff's request dated the 8th of December, 1966. Information is requested on a group of geologists last seen in the Yosemite area in late October. Thomas Kelly, 34, Robert Harris, 28, Michael Stone, 26, left Fresno on the 25th of October for private prospecting. Due back on the 3rd of November, a 1964 Ford pickup truck was found in the car park at Tunnel View on the 12th of November. Thomas Kelly, TK, initials on a geological rock hammer. Coincidence ruled out. The response of the park administration was formal. The specified persons were not registered for research. Search operations were not carried out due to the absence of a statement from relatives. Asked for more information. Susan brought another folder. The case was closed in February 1967 with no result. Witness statements were scant. The owner of a petrol station in El Portal saw 3 men in a pickup truck on the morning of the 25th of October. They bought petrol and asked for directions to remote areas. One of them was interested in geological maps of the area. The last testimony was on the 27th of October. A climber saw the smoke of a fire in the area of rockfalls but could not approach due to the difficult terrain. The next day, the smoke was gone. Then silence. The group just disappeared. But I knew that part of the group remained in the rockfalls forever. Copied the documents and asked Susan to keep them confidential. Officially, I was researching the story for a security report. The picture was becoming clearer. A team of geologists led by Kelly arrived in October 1966, officially for prospecting, realistically to mine gems from quartz veins. They set up camp in the rockfalls, worked covertly, but something went wrong. One of them got caught in a trap. The others disappeared. Or have they not disappeared? That evening at a local eatery, I talked to Bill Hartley, a guide with 30 years' experience. When I brought up the subject of the missing geologists, his face turned serious. "It happened," he said, sipping his beer. 3 were searched for in the winter of '66. Officially, the search was quickly called off, but unofficially, some rangers continued. Dave Clark, for instance. Good bloke, knew every rock in the mountains. What happened to him? He quit in January of '67, said he was tired of the service, but it was weird. The week before he was discharged, he walked around like he was lost. Something hit him, then he just up and quit. Went to Oregon. Did he say anything about the missing geologists? Bill looked closely. Why would you do that, Jim? Old stories should stay old. Yeah. researching accidents for a safety report. He was silent, leaning closer. Dave once said that not everyone who goes missing is really missing. Sometimes people don't disappear because they're lost. It's because they found something they weren't supposed to find, and someone made sure they didn't say anything. What did he mean by that? I don't know. I don't want to know. After that conversation, he changed. He stopped going on long-range patrols, asked to be put on tourist routes, and then he quit. We finished our beers in silence. Bill said everything he was going to say, and I got another thread in the story. I lay awake for a long time at night thinking over the facts. 3 geologists came to mine gems. 1 died in a trap. What happened to the others? Did they kill each other over their loot? 1 killed the other and escaped? Or did the 3rd one get rid of the witnesses? And most importantly, what did Ranger Clark discover that made him quit his job and leave the state? On the morning of the 7th of March, I would head out again to the rock falls. I now knew that I was not just looking for traces of a camp, but for answers to questions that could have cost the lives of several people. What started as a chance find was turning into an investigation with unpleasant prospects. The next day at 7 a.m., the thermometer showed +2 and the fog was even thicker in the valley. In my rucksack, the usual gear, plus copies of archival documents. If my assumptions are correct, more evidence will be needed today. The way to the rock falls took an hour and a half. When I reached a familiar place, I immediately noticed a change. Someone had been here after my last visit. The snow around the trap was crumpled and there were fresh boot prints on the wet ground. The tracks led to the quartz veins. There was activity there too. New chips in the rock, scratches from metal tools. Someone was continuing the work begun 20 years ago. Interested in archaeology, Ranger? A voice came from behind a boulder. It was a man's, quiet, with the wheeze of a smoker. A man in his 60s, wearing a worn jacket, stepped out from behind the rock. Gray hair, deep wrinkles, calloused hands, a geological hammer in his right hand. Robert Harris, he introduced himself, although I haven't officially existed for 19 years. Robert Harris, one of the 3 missing geologists. You've been following me? For the last 3 days, ever since you found the trap with Michael's bone in it. Poor guy's always been careless. Michael Stone? Yeah. Tom Kelly was in charge. I'm a geophysicist, Michael's a mineralogist. We didn't come here for the science, we came here for the money. Harris sat down on the boulder, placing the hammer beside him. In 1965, we worked for a company in Fresno. Tom found old reports on quartz veins, with gemstones in the archives. Nothing big for the industry, but for the private sector. Not bad money. So you decided to break the law? We decided to make a better life. A geologist's salary was ridiculous. And here were rocks that nobody guarded. Tourmalines, garnets. They were worth a lot of money on the San Francisco market. Harris pulled out a pouch, poured the contents into the palm of his hand. Dozens of crystals shimmered in the dim light. The result of 2 days' work in October 1966. About $5,000 then. My annual salary was $3.5. What happened to the others? Harris's face darkened. Greed. Tom decided that he was entitled to a bigger share. Michael backed him up. They conspired to exclude me from the sale. Michael even set traps around the rich plots. And you killed them? I defended myself. Tom attacked with a pickaxe. I had to hit him. He took a bad fall. And Michael ran in a panic, got caught in his own trap. Harris spoke as calmly as he did about the weather. 19 years later, the murder was simply a fact of biography. Buried Tom in a crevice, left Michael in the trap, took the rocks and left. Robert Harris died in a car accident in Nevada. And I became Robert Henson, moved to Arizona. Why did you come back? Because you didn't get all of them. There are bigger crystals deeper down. In 20 years, I've extracted another 15,000 stones. And Ranger Clark? He was too curious. I had to show him Tom's body, explained I could kill another one. He chose to quit. Harris stood up, picked up the hammer. Now the question, Ranger. What are you going to do? Pass it on to the prosecutor's office. That's a bad answer. I have a better suggestion. He took out another pouch, much larger. He poured the contents onto the stone. Dozens of large crystals glistened in the mist. There's still tens of thousands of stones in the vein. I'm old, I can't carry much. You have education and strength. We'll split the partnership. Instead of a report, you write that you found nothing. My geological training valued the collection at a minimum of $20,000, enough to pay off my debts and start a new life. And if I refuse, you'll be the fourth victim of an accident. A cave-in, a fall, a rock fall. All sorts of things happen in the mountains. I looked at the crystals. $20,000. Freedom from financial problems. But the price was silence about the murder and betrayal of my oath. I need time to think about it. 5 minutes, I won't wait any longer. Voices rang out in the mist. A group of climbers were coming up to El Capitan, ordinary people who trusted the rangers to protect these places. I made a choice. The radio crackled on the emergency frequency. Base, Wilson says, needs sheriffs and forensics help. Human remains and a murder suspect have been found. Harris attempted a hammer blow when he realized the negotiations were over. He ducked, hooked his leg, and pinned it to the ground. The geological hammer flew into the crevice between the boulders. "You're making a mistake, Ranger," he wheezed, lying face down in the snow. "That kind of money doesn't come along every day." "I know. That's why I'm refusing." A group of climbers whose voices I heard in the fog came in handy. 2 of them were doctors, helping to hold Harris until the sheriff arrived. By noon, the rock falls at El Capitan had become an active excavation site. Forensics found Thomas Kelly's body in a crevice exactly where Harris had indicated. The remains were well preserved due to the dry climate. Forensics confirmed blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Harris didn't back down. When questioned, he told me everything in detail, even more than he had told me in the mountains. 19 years of silence was weighing on him. The Mariposa County detectives were amazed that a case that had been considered hopeless since 1967 had been solved by a ranger's chance discovery. The trial took place in November 1985. Harris received a life sentence for the murder of 2 people. His lawyer tried to argue self-defense, but the evidence was against it. Too much violence in defense of his own life. The court's veins had been sealed. The Geological Survey estimated the total gem reserves at about $500,000. That's a serious enough sum to understand the motive for the murder. The site has been closed to the public indefinitely. David Clark was found in Portland, where he worked as an instructor at a forestry college. In a meeting with investigators, he confirmed Harris's threats in the winter of 1966. Said he always regretted being scared and not reporting it to the police. Maybe Michael Stone would still be alive if he had shown more courage, but I understood him. In 1966, he was a young ranger with a wife and young child. The threat of death from an armed assassin seemed more than real. Clark chose the safety of his family. Everyone makes choices based on their circumstances. My choices had consequences too. Financial problems haven't gone away. Alimony, student loans, living from paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes when I counted the bills, I thought about those crystals in Harris's hands. $20,000 could have changed everything. It was especially difficult in the spring of 1986, when the bank started the procedure of seizing my pickup truck for non-payment of the loan. I traveled to work by hitchhiking, saving money on everything. At such times, the choice between principles and money did not seem so obvious. But then I looked at the photos from the dig site. Michael Stone's bones in a rusty trap, Thomas Kelly's skull with a hammer fracture, and I realized I'd made the right choice. In May 1986, I was offered a promotion. Senior ranger with a section in the waterfalls area. More responsibility, but also more pay, enough to gradually clear my debts. And in September, I met Sarah, a teacher from a neighboring town. She came to Yosemite with a group of school children on a field trip. She asked about that ranger who caught the killer in the mountains. Turns out it was me. We were married a year later. Sarah turned out to be a person who understood the value of honesty more than the value of money. She said she was proud of her husband for choosing truth over easy gain. Sometimes tourists recognize me and ask me to tell a story about the Valley of Death in Yosemite. I tell it, but not all of it. About the bone trap, the investigation, catching the killer. But not about standing there with a thermos of coffee, choosing between money and conscience. Some choices are too personal to share with strangers. If you enjoyed this story, support the video with a like. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new exciting ranger stories. Each of us makes choices every day between the easy path and the right path. Which choice are you making? Write in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you in the next episodes.